I had a grief coach that I started to work with, and she said, "What do you want from this?" And I just said, "I really want to do grief well. I want to do grief really, really well." And it sounds really bizarre when I say that, um, but I wanted to really lean into the experience of grief and be able to live with it.
Yeah.
Time, it was impossible to live with. There's that awful moment when you wake up and you, for a split second, you feel like the world is as it should be,
Mm.
and then you realize it's not.
So, Emily, it's lovely to see you. Thank you so much for being part of this podcast. What I want to start with is just asking you about a particular turning point in your life that now that you look back, it feels quite significant for you. What would you say that would be?
And that's really interesting. I would say there's been probably two or possibly even three particularly strong turning points for me. The first I would say is was kind of probably in my early, where are we? Where am I? How old am I? Probably about sort of around 2011, 2012 when I started to train as a coach.
Yeah.
And it was a really interesting journey, learning about coaching, learning about the sort of theories that coaching comes from, and understanding more about myself and how I work. I've
Mm.
been brought up in a very spiritual, but also in a very pragmatic way. So there was a sort of spiritual element up here, which was just like, we are all one, and there's a sense of unity and consciousness and so on. But then the practical side of life, I was very, very, brought up very much in a very practical way. My dad's very practical, so there was the kind of day-to-day practicality of life.
Mm.
There was something missing. And when I kind of came across coaching, it filled in the gaps. It made me understand myself as an individual on a deeper level. And it also helped me to understand my relationship to the world and to other people, and how I had been inhabiting myself and inhabiting roles within my life,
Yeah.
in relationship to other people, particularly to my husband at the time.
Yes.
And I think the evolution of that understanding ultimately, unfortunately, led to the breakup of our relationship.
Mm.
But um, it was really, really informative for me about how I wanted to move forward as well, and what
Mm.
was actually a healthy relationship. What was what was going to be a useful, not a codependent relationship, which it, unfortunately, at the first marriage started to become. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious to know that, um, what was the trigger or the catalyst, not trigger so much, catalyst that actually made you think, oh, maybe I need to train to be a coach. And that could be a route for me to actually perhaps, discover more about myself.
Mm. So I had been working in the sort of well-being industry for probably since about 2005.
Mm.
I had retrained since leaving my first career, if you like, in as a Montessori teacher, and I had my kids. Then I went back into I retrained as a massage therapist just because why not,
Yeah.
and then from there I started to develop more of a kind of well-being practice. I started to run workshops. I started to run courses. I'm also a lifelong meditator, so I started to also run meditation groups and so on. So
Mm.
my work started to really revolve around other people's well-being. And through doing that work, I was asked many questions. People would start to bring me their problems, start to ask me, well, what should I do about this? And how should I deal with this situation? And so on. And I always wanted them to find their answers. I didn't
Yes.
want, and it's not so much didn't want the responsibility of me giving them an answer. It wasn't so much about responsibility. It was more about recognizing. I really recognized, I'm not quite sure how, but at that point I really recognized the power of someone coming up with their own answer. And so I started to bring that into, it came into my massage practice, it came into my well-being practice, workshops and all sorts. So that aspect sort of started to come in. And and it at the time I just sort of heard about coaching, and it sounded very similar to what I was doing. I had a few friends who were going into that world, and it sounded really familiar almost.
Mm.
I went to the Mind Body Spirit Festival, and I came across Nick Bolton, who was there at the stand talking about coaching from his point of view of the school, of the smart school, as it was called then. And I was hooked. I went along to the free day and I was like, this just talks to me. This is resonating with every fiber of my being.
Yeah.
And that was the start of the coaching journey, really. Yeah.
And I love that. I love that focus on, you got to find your own answers, and, don't look for a how to or a template or somebody else's solution, because it just might not be right for you. And I'm curious to know whether your Montessori background, whether that sort of, because that, from what little I know, obviously I didn't go to that kind of schooling, but that's one of the few kinds of schooling where children are still allowed to be curious, and they're allowed to sort of explore and experiment and find answers that way. So is that a good sort of is that the reason you kind of already knew the power of curiosity and finding your own answer?
Absolutely. And as you reflect that back to me, I would absolutely agree with that. I think there's something very similar about the Montessori way and the coaching way. Montessori is all about developing the child's independence at their speed in their time. And
Yes.
so as a Montessori teacher, you're always picking up on where the child is at and offering things that might be of interest and seeing what gets taken up, and
Yeah.
then being directed by the child,
Yeah.
which was so different from my own schooling and a
Same
real
here.
breath of fresh air.
Yes.
Um, and I think that's really, I would say, the kind of golden thread through everything that I've done has been to, um, be able to be in a position of offering possibilities, but allowing the individual to find their own path and their own
Yeah.
answers, because that's what's most empowering and that's what's most effective and transformative.
I love that. So that was one turning point. You said you had two or three. So tell us about the next one.
So once so that my once my husband decided at some point to leave, and that was a really devastating experience for me, because I had decided to stay in the marriage, particularly because I wanted to keep the family together. It was really important to me.
Mm.
And when he left, that was a real paradigm shift. And there was a sense, partly of his leaving because of my paradigm shift previously, through understanding myself, my relationship to him, and wanting to um, create a different form of relationship which didn't sit comfortably with him.
Mm.
So I think it was about maybe 6 months after he left, and we were sorting through the sort of divorce period, and I was stepping into that space of having to really step up and earn enough income to support my children, to pay the mortgage, to all the rest of it. Um, and I was invited on a trip to Everest Base Camp. And this was with a few friends, and it was completely out of my comfort zone. Totally. In fact,
Yeah.
I had said yes to it before the breakup of my marriage. So
Mm.
because it needed to be, there needed to be some time there, some lead up time to it. So there I was in the kind of March, in March sort of 2017, just going, what am I doing? I have got a business to run, I've got money to bring in, I've got family to run, but I've signed up to this this crazy trip, kind of a trip of a lifetime, but still a crazy trip to Everest Base Camp, where I know I'm going into altitude. I know it's going to be hard. I know I'm going to have to be trekking every day and carrying lots of my own stuff and so on. It's not going to be easy. And anyway, having got myself there, um, I found the trip physically very, very difficult. The altitude really particularly affected me. Nausea, headaches, breathlessness. I developed a chest infection pretty quickly.
Mm.
Sounds dreadful, but it was a beautiful place, absolutely stunning. But the whole process of going on that trip, getting myself out there, then trekking for 10 days up to base camp at altitude, feeling the rigorous effects of altitude, but being surrounded by the most extraordinary beauty and the vastness of the vastness and beauty of the mountains. That was just extraordinary. I remember walking along around one mountain on the way from Namche Bazaar, and seeing eagles flying in circles next to me,
Wow.
because they were flying in the valley, they were flying above the valley below us, and there was something quite extraordinary about being a human in that space,
Yeah.
going on that trip, and pushing myself so much further than I thought was actually possible. Um, I used every technique I could possibly think of. I lent into resilience and strength that I didn't know I had. And we got there.
Mm.
There were times when the guide said, "I don't think you're going to make it. I think we're going to have to get you down in a helicopter, etc." But we got there, and we got to the top. We got to Everest Base Camp. Um, it was beautiful. It was amazing. And then coming down from Everest Base Camp and coming back to England and just having this sense of almost like a kind of superpower, suddenly realizing that actually that I could do so much more than I had previously thought. And I would say that's the case for everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone and anyone, we tend to limit ourselves so much by our own thinking and the limits that we place on ourselves.
Yeah.
So I came back from that feeling that so much more was possible. And it really helped me to step up into so many different roles in so many different ways.
And on that trip, I mean, obviously being unwell and physically finding it demanding is difficult enough. Did you have other people with you who kind of really changed the way you felt about the challenge? And I wonder how that the camaraderie that you may have created with people on that trip, how that changed your relationship with other humans and other people back here in England.
So it was a lovely group of people, and I had known some of them I'd known for a long time, and some of them were completely new to me. And there was a lot of camaraderie going up, and there was a lot of support for each other. And it was incredibly supportive. And there's something about coming back to England and the connections that I had with people out there. Particularly those who I'd known for some time, are so much stronger because of that trip.
Yeah.
Um, and there was a lot of support, a lot of just helping each other through each little trial. Like, for example, going across some of those horrible kind of wire bridges that you see in videos, and I was terrified of going across those bridges, but I had a lot of people on that trip really supported me to get across those bridges, which was
Yeah.
amazing. That kind of um, ability to lean on each other,
Yeah.
that event, if you like, that journey.
Wow. And so when you came back to the relative mundaneness of life, what changed for you, other than obviously, that feeling of you, being a superwoman? How did that change your life?
It made me feel um, for a start. I remember going to the supermarket and going, "Oh my goodness, this is so excessive." I walked into Waitrose because it was my nearest supermarket. And I
Yeah.
remember overhearing a woman saying to her husband, "Do you know, I think they've moved the chocolate biscuits. I can't find them anywhere." And it was just so surreal.
Yeah.
Um, but but aside from that, I think the kind of just being able to view life and know what was important,
Mm.
a sense of actually what is important. And where you find the chocolate biscuits in the supermarket aisles, not really important in the grand scheme of things. We saw huge amounts of poverty out there in Nepal,
Mm.
and we challenged ourselves physically as well. And you come back and it's a sense of really appreciating what you have, and a sense of also appreciating the opportunities that you have, and the fact that things are so possible. There are so many things that are really, really possible,
Yeah.
that we so often just shut off from.
How did that change your kind of thinking about what you were going to do for the practical, mundane things like, making money and being able to pay the bills? I mean, did the way you approach those challenges, did that change, and how did it change for you?
That's a really interesting question. Um, I think it made me more open to possibilities and more open to opportunities as and when they came, and a sort of sense of just taking risks.
Mm,
Not in a sense of, putting my family on the line or anything like that, but looking for possibilities where I could step up
yeah,
or take a chance on something and move into a different way of being and move into a different kind of position. Depending on what it was, there were all sorts of different things that came up.
yeah,
Um, and I think also there was also a sense of thinking less about myself and more about um, how I could be of service. So it's, I guess it's something around, and I've noticed this a lot actually over the last probably, yeah, probably 20, sort of 15 years or so. I've noticed for me a real shift from when I'm in conversation, a real shift from feeling a sense of what's everyone else thinking about me to I don't need to think about that. I'm not even going to go there. There's no point thinking or considering what anyone else is thinking about me. How can I engage with this human being? How can I be in connection? How
yes,
can I, eh, you know, build uh, build connection with the person in front of me? Because that's actually what's most important.
yeah.
And so you start to just, let go of all those kind of smaller thoughts of judgment or perception of yourself or how am I saying things or what am I doing here.
Mm.
And just shift into a space of being as much in connection with the other person as possible.
So being really present in the moment. Yeah. And what was the consequence of that when you had that new way of being and a new way of looking at opportunities in life? What changed in material, terms for you?
um well, materially, I think in the following year or two, I doubled my salary, more than doubled my salary, well, my
Mm,
income, not salary, I was
mm,
self-employed, but more than doubled my income through various different ways, just being open to opportunities and taking things up and um, yeah, being excited about new connections and new ways of interacting and being with other people.
yeah.
Um, I think also being able to have that perspective and let go of myself, that kind of inner chatter more, being more present, um, allowed me to be better at what I was already doing. So I was still doing massage. I was working in schools doing massage for staff, which was great fun, and
Mm,
running wellbeing and meditation clubs in schools as well for staff,
yeah. Yeah.
as well as doing the coaching and also running training for Animus and some CPDs for Animus as well, the coaching school. So there's a lot of different things, and I also started to employ people to do the massage work in schools as well. So it all just started to really start to flourish, which was it was lovely, and it was just beautiful to see that all happen.
Yes.
I have had other things come my way which have just been clear no's. So I
Yeah.
think um, it's always going to be a question when something comes my way. It's not always a yes,
No.
but it's also not a no, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not always
Yes.
categorically a no. It's a kind of okay. How does this align with what I want? How does this align with my values? Um, what is the connection I have here with what they're doing?
Yes.
And then following that as far as that road goes and being very clear and honest that when it's not working anymore.
Yeah. And I think having that sort of very deep knowing of your inner compass and what, having answers to that question, is this right for me? Is this the right time? Is this aligned with my values? And I think that's where the work that you did done previously has really helped you, hasn't it? Because that self-awareness is not something we overnight get, even after we've just done a coaching course. It takes a long time. So I want to ask you about when you said you grew up, with spirituality as part of your thing. Tell us a bit about that. How did that translate into, everyday life for you?
So I grew up in quite an unusual situation. Although, I say that, but I've also met people from other walks of life who also grown up in very unusual situations. There's a usualness about unusual situations, right?
Yes.
um, the unusualness of my situation was that my parents were both within an organisation uh, that was uh, that was designed. Well, that the whole organisation was focused on the philosophy of uh, the sort of Indian tradition, if you like. Well, the basis of that being Advaita, the idea of
Oh, yeah.
non-duality.
Yes, yes.
And at that organization followed a particular guru in India, and went and had conversations with them, and brought those conversations back for the conversation within the organization. And then as a result of that, they created a school, a day school for the children. um, and so this school is really where I was brought up in. So we learned Sanskrit,
Wow.
we studied Sanskrit literature, we studied the philosophies of Advaita, we studied the Bhagavad Gita, we studied all sorts of different things like that. Plus having quite a kind of orthodox uh, education that was, I would say, verging on Victorian in some ways. It was quite strict. Um,
Yes.
but growing up with all of that, and growing up with that both at school and at home, we learnt to meditate from a very young age. We learnt mindfulness from
Mm,
dot. We learnt mantra meditation from the age of 10 or 11. And growing up within that, um, there was there were definitely challenges with that. It wasn't easy. There
mm,
was also what came with it also is I suppose an exploration of what we are,
yes.
an exploration, always asking that question: who am I? What am I? What
Mm,
is this that lies beneath the kind of external ways of being that we are, the kind of day-to-day emotions and thoughts and this body, and what lies beneath that? What is at the essence and core of each of us? And how
mm,
is that connected to everything around us? This idea that awareness, self-awareness is key.
yes.
Understanding ourselves, understanding the world around us. And when we look within, and um, we really bring that awareness into to question who and what we are, then we have the opportunity to touch on what's actually true.
Um, I'm just trying to think, as a young child, to be brought up with those very profound ways of, thinking and exploring your inner world. What was it like when you came in touch with just children who had sort of very normal education? Did they or when did that happen? Because obviously you were in this school. Were you in the school right until what, sixth
Yeah,
form or something like that? Yeah.
absolutely. Yes, yeah,
But
absolutely.
even so, I'm just curious to know what when you hit the real world, the real world,
Yeah,
what was
we,
it like for you?
we were the weird ones. We were the weird ones who meditated. And this is going back in the kind of like into the 80s, where meditation just wasn't a thing. Like
Mm,
these days, pretty cool, right?
yeah.
But back in the 80s, no, that was considered completely weird, because it ultimately was completely against the zeitgeist of the 80s. That was all about kind of being empowered and being out there and making money. And here we are, here we were in a kind of situation where that was considered very surface level, and actually
Mm.
more important was the spiritual journey.
Wow. And from there you went to Montessori, which kind of is a slightly different way of exploring a holistic way to be educated. How interesting. I knew this conversation was going to be really fascinating. So, excuse me. So you've sort of learned the art of, self-exploration and self-discovery early on, and then you mentioned that your relationship with your husband wasn't um, a healthy one, or you said it was codependent. Um, did did you find that despite all this self-awareness and understanding how to ask those deep questions and maybe get some answers, that there was something that was, I don't want to say missing, but it did it not make finding relationships and interactions with other people who maybe didn't have that sort of education? How did you deal with that? I'm asking this question really badly, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. That one would have thought, because you had such good awareness, that you would you would know exactly who the right person for you was, because you
Mm.
knew what you needed. Do you see what I mean?
No, I absolutely get what you're saying,
Mm.
and it's a really good question. I think what kind of what I was alluding to earlier is that kind of education is very, very powerful in terms of asking yourselves those really big questions and exploring, what it is that unites us all, and taking on that spiritual journey. But what it didn't do was really, and certainly self-awareness was a huge part of that, asking those questions, going inward, um, seeing the world in a different way,
Mm.
that spiritual perspective. But what it didn't give me was an understanding of how we work as humans.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah.
So, how we work at a very human level, how we can get into codependent relationships, how
Yeah.
we bring this kind of extraordinary, massive, kind of personality with us. And I think that's in speaking to quite a few people from all sorts of different backgrounds and walks of life. I think that can often be the case when you have a strong spiritual influence.
Mm.
The spiritual is kind of up here. The spiritual is
Yes.
like this kind of connection to something broad and big and universal and essential.
Yes.
Um, but we are living as human beings in this world.
Yes.
So it's also really helpful to understand how we work in our own mind, how these brains work, how our emotions work, how the physicality is affected by all of that, and the interrelationship of all those different things.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so in that, I did not understand any of that really. Although I had awareness of maybe when I was being emotional or awareness of thoughts when they came in, I didn't have an understanding of how that all worked from a kind of psychology point of view, if you like.
Yes. Yes.
Which was why becoming a coach was so mind blowing because it filled in
Mm.
the gaps.
That makes so much sense. And actually, in my, I recently published a book, and in there I talk about, you just your kind of awareness about your inner world, which is what we do when we go and sit in meditation and really, look inwards. But that's not enough. That's one part of your awareness. The other one is, who are you when you're with other people?
Mm,
Over whom you have no control, and you don't know how aware or not aware they are, and you discover a whole new version of you with each person that you're relating to. And I think you've just described beautifully how that works in real life. And I think this is why sometimes I think that for young people, they shouldn't be in a hurry to evolve and become really, wise, because there's all this other stuff, all these human experiences that need to be experienced for them to really learn, you know about other people, but also about themselves. So thank you for sharing that. I love that. So tell us a bit more about, your journey since, because you've explored coaching, you've blossomed in the different opportunities that's brought you. Where's that taken you, and how are you finding, life's journey now?
yes. Um, so um, so yes, moving on from that kind of point of the Everest trip and kind of really starting to flourish in my work and what I did and so on. It really expanded my kind of view of the world. Suddenly being not with a partner and in
Mm.
the world and creating my life, as it were. And then about 2 years after that my marriage broke down, I met my current husband, and that was amazing in itself. And he's fantastic, and we are very, very similar in our kind of outlook and so on.
Yeah.
um, COVID hit, that put a stop to my massage business. So things kind of changed and shifted over time.
Mm.
And then I guess the next huge event that really happened for me, which was very, very difficult and life changing again, was when my son died.
Mm.
He was a young man of 19. He was ready to go to university, full of the joys of life. Had his first girlfriend for a few months, had his first job, and he went to work one day and he didn't come back. And
Oh my God.
he passed away at work of a cardiac arrest,
Oh.
for which there is no explanation. And this happens to many young people. I didn't realize. But this happens to quite a few young people. And so that was epic in terms of challenge,
Mm.
uh, hugely difficult time. Um, being faced with both shock and grief at the same time. Going on that journey with my new husband as well. We were 2 weeks off getting married when that happened. And we decided to get married anyway, but not to have the big wedding, not to have the huge celebration, because that was inappropriate, just not right. But we got
Mm.
married anyway. And being part of his family, and managing to, or navigating the shift in my own family, and my, the loss of my son was a tremendous life changer. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. Yes, I was aware that it happened, but it's hard to put words to how that must have been for you. And thank you so much for, sharing that. So I think it's such grief is such a personal thing, isn't it? We all deal with it very, very differently. And especially in your situation where you had no warning whatsoever. I'm assuming your son was completely healthy, no warning signs, and that to be taken away like that with no warning, I can't imagine what that was like. And how has that grief, shaped you as time has gone on? So you said it's been 4 years now, is that right?
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah.
what do you notice about yourself that you can say, well, that's because this happened?
Mm. Um, Gosh, where do I start? So many different things. Um, I think initially it was the shock and then the grief that really hit.
Mm.
And just, I remember saying, this sounds so awful. I remember saying I had a grief coach that I started to work with. And she said, "What do you want from this?" And I just said, "I really want to do grief well." I want to do grief really, really well. And it sounds really bizarre when I say that. Um, but I wanted to really lean into the experience of grief and be able to live with it.
Yeah.
Time, it was impossible to live with. There's that awful moment when you wake up and you, for a split second, you feel like the world is as it should be.
Mm.
And then you realize it's not. And then your whole world comes crashing down again. And that happens that for a long time. That happened every day.
Yeah.
And it catches you. It still catches me unawares, but much less so than it used to. I'd see someone on the train who had a resemblance to my son, and then I would be suddenly then smacked with that grief and
Yeah.
dealing with that grief all again.
Yeah.
um, I found a lot of solace in writing about it.
Mm.
I wrote a blog about it, and this was just for my own benefit, to write the blog and to express my experience of grief and mourning, um,
Yeah.
and to kind of express that journey, I guess, as I went through it. And I still add to that occasionally now, but a lot less so. But that was hugely transformative. It helped me to process it, and amazingly, in that it also helped others. And I still get messages today saying I'm reading it again, and it's really helping me. So thank you so much. So that brings me joy.
Yeah.
Um, I I learned a lot about my son after he died from his friends,
Yes, that's interesting.
which was
Isn't it?
also lovely. So you kind
Yeah.
of get to know the person more through the eyes of other people.
Yeah.
Um, and there have been so many things that have helped. So I think one of the things that happens, when someone dies suddenly, it's absolutely shocking, and particularly when a child dies. And for me, that had been a personal nightmare. So I remember saying to one of my best friends, I don't know, maybe 3 years before he died, I remember saying explicitly to one of my friends, wouldn't it be awful to lose a child when you had got to that point where they were just about to set off into the world and become an adult, and you'd
Mm.
invested all of yourself in them? You'd invested your energy, your emotion, your time, everything into this human being, and then they died. Wouldn't that be just the worst? And then it happened. Being someone who is always trying to do other things for other people, always in that space of helping others, um, the tables were completely turned.
Yeah.
I was incapable for a couple of months of doing much at all. And I can't tell you the the amazingness of people.
Mm.
We felt surrounded by this kind of basket of love, if you like, of people offering me food, offering, I would go to the front door and there was a book on the front doorstep about grief, and people would bring around food, people would bring toilet rolls, tea bags, and some people would just come in and sit and hold my hand, and other people
Yeah.
would come in and bring flowers or do the cleaning or whatever way people could help, they helped, and it
Mm.
was so beautiful. It was so beautiful. Um, and that's something, me and my husband talk about quite frequently, is this extraordinariness of being held in that kind of basket of love, if you like, and having to let go, having to let go of doing ourselves, having to let go and allow ourselves to be helped, because both of us are helpers, to be fair.
Mm.
And allowing, so really allowing, I think that was such a huge lesson for me, to allow other people to help me, to be held by other people. Um, and it's influenced and really shifted so many relationships in my life. So many friendships have been strengthened by that experience, by being, allowing other people to help me, and then in turn at some other times being able to help them too.
Yes.
Um, the practice of gratitude, which me and my husband had started back in lockdown, also became a huge anchor. Um, and we had practiced it every night. Sometime we started in lockdown, sometime, and we had practiced it every night, and we kept returning to it even in the darkest times of those, those months of shock and deep grief, coming back to gratitude. And even in the depths of that grief and shock, I can probably count on one hand the times where I couldn't do it. The practice of that has been hugely influential, and has really, I think, shifted my thinking. In the long term, it's changed the pathways of my neurons, if you like.
Yeah.
Just practicing that, regardless, day in day out, despite what we were going through. And again, I come back to that sort of superwoman thing. It sounds really, I'm not superwoman. I really am not. But um, but there's this kind of strong sense of, I have, it was a complete nightmare. In some ways, it still is. I'm still, this grief, it will never goes away. It's a constant. Um, but I can speak about it. I can talk about it easily.
Mm.
And I have lived through my worst nightmare, and I'm still here. And I'm still,
Yes.
and
You faced your worst fear and
totally,
you still survived. Yeah.
yeah, yes. And I think that's so true of, again, as I said before, it's so true of most of us, that we can actually come through things that we think are impossible.
Mm.
And so this kindness to self is really important. Being aware, noticing, being able to be aware of when, for example, in that situation, when grief is bubbling, or
Mm.
I see it almost as like, if I might have a kind of, oh, that was uncomfortable. There's a kind of bubble of grief coming my way, and I can ride it. And if another bubble comes along, I can ride that. But I know that, okay, there's a few bubbles coming my way. That means I need to really practice some kindness to myself, give
Mm.
myself space to really mourn in order to ride that wave of grief. And then the other aspect is common humanity, which is recognizing that whatever you're going through, however awful or however amazing, someone has already been there before you.
Mm.
There have been many women who've been through grief of losing a child. And whatever I am going through, it's not to diminish it, but more to say, this is part of being human. This is
Mm.
just another part of being human. And we can come through this. It's absolutely possible.
Yeah. And when you said wanted to do grief well, did you discover what that actually meant? And I'm interested to know if you were to sort of say what you were looking for in order to be able to say that, yeah, I'm grieving as I want to grieve. What
Mm.
did you find?
So I think at the time when I said it, I just wanted an out. I wanted a way of, right, if I do this really well, then I can come out the other side and be absolutely fine and never have to feel grief again.
I
It
see.
was obviously a process, and I recognized, as I started to go through that, I started to realize that grief is not something that you can ever get over. There will be a kernel which always remains.
Mm.
But the way that we can move forward is to grow around it and to grow bigger and bigger and bigger around it.
Yeah.
And that is how we become more resilient and how actually we can do grief well, if at all.
Yeah.
Um, and I think from that point also, I mean, a lot of my work up to that point had really been about well-being. I think resilience started to become more of interest to me, particularly when my marriage broke down and going on that Everest trip. But it became really, really important following my son's death.
Mm.
Resilience is all about compassion, about leaning into those feelings, about allowing yourself to be human, but then being able to come out the other side and step through and step forward.
Yes.
It's about um, utterly and completely being human,
Yeah.
being able to see the way through.
And it's so hard to do this. I think that's why you're saying about you wanted to do it well is a point well made, because it's really hard to do. And very often people see resilience as the ability to bounce back. Like something happened to you, how quickly can I just put that behind me and bounce back? And they bypass that whole necessary process of actually sitting with that thing that was so uncomfortable, so painful, and allowing it to be seen and heard and all of that before you bounce back. And I think the way you describe resilience is resilience in the truest sense of the word, and not the more kind of, the the modern way of like, let's just quickly move on. And I also heard someone say this, and I thought it was so beautiful, that actually where there's a lot of grief, there's love.
Mm,
They go together. So when you grieve for someone so much, it's because you love them so much. And
mm.
so they are kind of intertwined, and you can't, it's impossible to shut it off just because you want to get on with life. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, Emily. And I want to just maybe ask you to finish this conversation, maybe give us a few, just not so much advice, but for someone who's grieving. It could be for a child, it could be for a parent, or it could be even for a beloved dog. We grieve our dogs so much because they just love us so unconditionally. What are the two or three things that really helped you to dive into that ocean of grief, and be okay with being there, and know that, okay, I'm not going to drown in it. It's okay for me to swim in there. I'm going to come back out, live life, and maybe I'll have to visit this ocean again. What would you say to those people who are grieving?
Mm. Okay, oh gosh, I'm trying to hone it down.
Mm.
I think there's a number of different things. Be compassionate to yourself. Remember, you're not the only one. There are many thousands, millions of people who've also experienced this kind of loss, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That you're not alone, and that's not. And it's absolutely not to say, well, come on, pull your socks up, you should get on with it. Absolutely not. This idea of common humanity is to say you are not alone. You're
Mm.
not the only person who's had to go through this. You're absolutely not alone on this journey, and that's really important. So be compassionate to yourself. Um, Allow yourself time to be aware of what you're feeling and give yourself time to mourn.
Mm.
So make space for mourning. So grief is what we go through, but the practice of grief is mourning.
Yes.
So give yourself time to mourn. Make a ritual of it if necessary, but give yourself time to mourn. And we will all mourn in different ways. Some of us will want to mourn on our own. Some of us will want to mourn with other people. Some of us will do it through writing. Some of us will do it through writing songs or
Mm.
singing, whatever it might be. We all will mourn in different ways. Find your way that works for you to mourn and give yourself time to do that.
Yeah.
And then also with that is not to wallow in that, not to
Mm.
stay too long. Stay
Mm.
stay just long enough to allow the feelings to pass and then step forward and let it go.
Yes.
And I think for me, one of the biggest things about grief has been one is letting go, keep letting go, keep letting go. And the other is to expand your love. So the
Mm.
love that you felt for that individual is not necessarily limited, doesn't need to be limited to that individual that's passed. It can expand as far as you want it to.
Yes.
So we have my son's friends, they're part of our lives. I take joy in seeing other young people grow up and move on with their lives. Um, I take joy in expanding and my circles and just expanding love out into the world because actually that is the flip side of grief.
Yeah, wow, that's so beautiful. So the first one is compassion towards yourself. Second one was really expressing yourself, allowing yourself to express the grief, whether it's through rituals or something else. And the third one is to not wallow in it. And I think that one's particularly powerful because for some people it feels almost like if they stop grieving, that somehow it means they don't miss them anymore, they don't love them anymore. And I loved how you kind of, turn that around, that love will always be there, but just because you expanded your love and then you include other people in it doesn't mean you love that person any less.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. And then my final question to you, Emily, is, we all have our own definition of what a fulfilled life means to us. And I sense for you that's certainly evolved over time, through your journey. So where you are today, what would you consider to be a fulfilled life?
mm. What would I consider to be a fulfilled life? I think the capacity to enjoy every moment and to and I this sounds very very corny, but to love and be loved.
Yeah.
For me, that is, yeah, absolutely definition of a fulfilled life. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Do you have any final thoughts or words that you want to share with me and the people who are listening?
No, I don't think so. I think that's it. Thank you. Thank you so much for
Well,
having me.
thank you. Thank you. It's been such a lovely conversation, and I've learned certainly a few things about grief. And I think I loved your particular story of how you allowed yourself to accept help, because I think a lot of us do sort of become hermits, and I think that wallowing is not always intentional, but we sort of, and I read this thing and it really sort of struck with me that suffering doesn't come as a result of feeling feelings. It comes when you feel the thing and you keep thinking about it and you repeat that feeling even after there's no reason to feel it. And I think what you said was just hit the nail on the head, that's when people, the grief is no longer a healthy thing. It becomes something that they've chosen to wallow in. So thank you for, explaining that so beautifully. Maybe just finally just tell us in terms of, what kind of people would be helped by you and what sort of services you offer as a coach.
Absolutely. So my coaching is really focused around well-being and resilience, and so that includes a whole number of different things.
Mm.
But my focus is definitely around well-being and becoming more resilient. What through coaching, becoming more resilient in yourself. We've got a fantastic retreat coming up in June, so that's going to be very much around this work of well-being, getting back to nature, resetting and reconnecting.
Oh wow, where's it going to be held?
that's going to be held at our campsite here in Dorset, which is a beautiful, magical.
Oh, amazing. Thank you. So I'll put all the links to all your various, your website and other things in our show description. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming and talking to me, and also being so open and vulnerable, and sharing your various turning points and journey with us, Emily.
Lovely. Thank you so much. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.